Hi, I'm Jim.
And I'm Becca.
And we are professional Englishists.
So you might be wondering why we have wine today.
Yeah, this is our Game of Thrones day, so we're going to be watching some Game of Thrones and wine seemed appropriate.
I've read the books, and Jim has seen more of the shows. Yeah. So between the two of us, we know what's coming up. And all we can say, and fans will know this term, we're going to be watching The Red Wedding.
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of stuff that requires wine.
Theme day.
Theme day. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how to construct a thesis and what a thesis is. A thesis, sort of in a nutshell, is what your paper is about, is the argument you're trying to make in your paper.
The way I describe it to my students is this. You introduce the problem, you hook your reader and bring them in with the introduction, but then the thesis is pretty much what you want your reader to see, the solution that you're trying to explain throughout the whole paper. And you put it at the end of the introduction for very tricky reasons. It's kind of like if you tell someone, oh, well, I never see red cars driving around town. They'll leave your house and they'll see nothing but red cars because you put that idea in their head. And so your thesis is you putting your solution in your reader's head, and that's what you want them to see throughout the rest of the paper. We wanted to give you an example of a thesis, and we're going to use one of mine. I was writing a paper about Huckleberry Finn. My argument was talking about Huck as being a moral character. And now, if anyone has read Huck Finn, you know at the very beginning that he is a very immoral character. He's a very selfish brat. But through his experiences with Jim on the river, I believe he becomes the example of morality. Or at least realistic morality. Essentially, you've got a little boy who runs away from home because he's scolded, and he's made to go to school, and he doesn't want to be this way. He hops on with Jim for convenience, not so much because he really understands what's going on. And he experiences prejudice and, hardships with Jim. But he and Jim also become a community on this raft. They're equals. On the river, they're just people. Off the river, they're having a hard time. And at the end, when Jim gets captured, because Jim gets captured and he's going to be brought back to be a slave, Huck honestly believes that to free a slave is against the law and a sin. And there's a moment in the book where he struggles with himself, thinking, if I help Jim, I will be going against the law, I will be sinning, and I'll probably go to hell. And then he sort of weighs the option and goes, for Jim, I will go to hell. So essentially, he's willing to sacrifice himself and his eternity for his friend. And I think that self-sacrifice is what really makes him a true moral character. So my thesis is this. Through his experience with Jim, both by the practical jokes and through their escape on the river, and his observation of human tendency towards self-interest and the results that follow, Huck develops a conscience and becomes a realistically moral character.
Right, so let's unpack thesis then, because that's what we probably ought to do, right?
All right.
That last section there is really sort of your claim, right? Like, Huck develops conscience, becomes a realistically moral character. What's leading up to that are these situations that you are sort of using to confine that statement, right?
Exactly.
It's like through his experience with Jim, both through the practical jokes and their escape on the river, so this is the means through which this happens, and his observation of human tendencies towards self-interest and results that follow, this claim that I'm saying happens, right?
Yeah. So what I basically did was I ended on my claim. That's just one way of making a thesis. Sometimes your claim will be towards the front, and you'll give your evidence afterwards.
Right.
What I did here is I basically set up so that each paragraph that follows is going to go in this order. I talk about the practical jokes. I talk about the escape. I talk about the human tendency towards self-interest, and I talk about the results. And then finally, I give the example of when Huck develops his sort of moral character.
Right. And even, more importantly than that, one of the things we always tell students is that you have to have a narrow thesis, right? Exactly. If you have too broad a thesis, you're either going to write a 70-page paper or a 2-page paper because it's just not a good thesis to write a paper for.
Exactly.
So if you just said Huck develops a conscience, becomes a realistically moral character, that would be too broad of a thesis. But by giving, the means through which he does that as part of your thesis, it gives you something narrow to prove. This is how this happens.
And then I also sort of expand upon each of those ideas in the separate paragraphs. Sure. So these are each aspect becomes the topic sentence, and then I add to it. So yeah, it's good to start out narrow because you can always add on, but it's really hard. If you're too broad, it's really hard to focus.
And the thing is that your thesis, everything in your paper should relate back to your thesis. Your thesis is the argument you're making for your entire paper. So if it doesn't relate to your thesis, you have a problem. And it's much easier to start with a narrow thesis
Mm-hmm.
and then expand upon it throughout your paper
Yes.
than it is to start with a broad thesis, and then it's really easy to like go off somewhere and then you don't know if it relates to your thesis anymore. You're not really making the same argument. Now you're making a more specific argument, and so it's much more difficult.
All right.
So like the video, subscribe to the channel, all of that good stuff. And I hope you like this. Leave comments. If you guys have any like questions about thesis construction or a thesis you're writing or a paper or something like that, go ahead and leave those in comments and maybe we'll get to them.
Yeah. And if you want us to, on camera, like go through your paper and tell you what works, we can also do that. I mean,
Yeah,
you'd
that's
be very
fine, too.
bold.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with doing that. We need more content. So
Yeah.
if you want to send us stuff to look over and comment on, then we can look over and comment stuff. And you'll get some free professional advice, so be good for you.
Not editing advice.
Not editing advice. We won't edit it for you, but
No.
we would give you sort of just like structural advice
and the means to which to fix your paper yourself. Right. We will teach you how to fish.
Yeah.
And then let you go
and then
fish.
let you go fish. All right. See you next week.
Bye.